70. 70! Hey Dev, why are you starting your videos off with random numbers? That's a weird thing to do. Well, I say 70 because that is the percentage of Magic players who have never played in a tournament, and it's probably actually higher than that. That's just the only number I can find. The casual crowd, we call them, those who practice their art in lunchrooms, break rooms, afternoon hangout sessions, family game nights, parties, and sleepovers. By Wizards' estimation, there are about 14 million of these players across the world, and all of them want to play a deck that does something cool and they don't have a whole lot of disposable income to spend on it. Luckily, though, Wizards always weaves some fun budget concepts into each set, and over the last few years, these have been some of the community's favorite decks because they each do something unique without breaking wallets. From Poison Arrows to Green-White Renown to Eldrazi Pingers and Ravenous Revolution, there's always a unique deck hiding somewhere in Standard ready to be discovered. And today, we're taking a look at the latest in the Bloodline, Green-Black Unblockable Blades. What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like Magic, and we got a kooky one today, but you've already been watching this video for like 2 minutes, and you still don't know what this deck actually is or what it does, so let me go ahead and get right down to it with the Blades half of the equation. So we're going to run 4 copies of Glaive of the Guildpact, and 4 copies of the all-but-forgotten Captain's Hook for Mixel Block. Now, both of these equips are capable of giving your creatures a nice little power boost, and Glaive can even give your creatures vigilance, which is cool sometimes. But what we're mostly in the market for here is, believe it or not, the Menace. You don't hear that every day. Now, Menace is a nice ability by itself. It's kind of a pseudo-unblockable ability, especially against decks that don't run a lot of creatures in the first place. But in this deck, we can make creatures with Menace completely unblockable. Now, doing that is actually really simple right now because there's an ability that isn't keyworded yet or anything, but it keeps showing up on more and more creatures nowadays. And it's the ability to not be blocked by more than one creature. We actually have 3 creatures in Standard right now with this ability, and if we give them Menace, they are just completely unblockable. So we're going to play playsets of all of them: Bristling Boar, Hungering Hydra, and Vigor Spore Worm. Now, all of these creatures are pretty big in their own right. Bristling Boar might be the smallest, but it still has 4 power, so if you put a Captain's Hook on it, you're swinging for 6 unblocked. That is real closing power. With Vigor Spore Worm, it's already 6 power, so if you put a Captain's Hook on it, you're swinging for 8 unblocked. Hungering Hydra is as big as you want it to be, and if you put an equipment on it, it's just going to get bigger and go unblocked as well, and it's really hard to deal with. And the cool thing about Vigor Spore Worm specifically is that if you already have, say, a Bristling Boar with a Captain's Hook on it, you're going to go for 6 unblocked anyway, but if you play Vigor Spore and you have like 4 creatures in your graveyard, well, suddenly you're getting through for half your opponent's starting life total with that Bristling Boar that turn. So again, just real closing power. If any of these things go unblocked, they finish the game in just a couple of swings some of the time. Now, to be honest with you, as far as the backbone of the deck, that's pretty much it. You know, you play play sets of the equipments, you play play sets of the creatures you have to play, and then what you do with the rest of the shell is more or less up to you at this point, but I'm going to keep going and show you what I did with the rest of the shell and give you some sort of informed opinions on why I made those card choices. Starting with some mana elves here. I went with 4 copies of Llanowar Elves, 4 copies of Druid of the Cal, and 4 copies of District Guide. Now, as far as the mana elves here, they have a lot of functions. You know, we're trying to get to 6 drops like Vigor Spore Worm. We want to cast huge Hungering Hydras, so it's important to play some mana elves. They're a good early game plan. Druid of the Cowl blocks at least reasonably well in the early game. And hey, if you give either of these guys a Captain's Hook, you've got a 3-power Menace guy, which isn't bad, really. Mana Elves also sort of help us mitigate some of the tempo that we're bound to lose by playing equipments in the first place, so they offset that a little bit. Another good reason to play them. There's just a lot of reasons to play Mana Elves, and I think we do need to fill a lot of these remaining slots with creatures. We want creatures for an early game plan. We want to be able to slap these equipments on creatures if we don't have our primary creatures out. And to top it all off, we need a bunch of creatures in the deck so that Vigor Spore Worm's Undergrowth ability will actually pop off correctly when it finally does hit the battlefield. So we need to fill these slots with creatures anyway, for the most part, and I think that Mana Elves are a good place to start. Now, in the case of District Guide, this is effectively a Mana Elf in and of itself, too, you know. It guarantees you a 4th mana source, and that's important in a deck that's trying to get all the way up to 6. You need all the lands you can get, so District Guide guarantees you another land, and that's important enough, but it can also go get gates. And we are playing a number of gates in this deck for a couple of reasons, but mostly we want to make sure that Glaive of the Guildpact actually gives the creature like at least +2/+0, and District Guide can really help out with that. But the last few slots in the deck are reserved for having fun, so we're going to play a couple of copies of Fried Oak or Assassin to start off the fun train, because this card is awesome in this deck for a few reasons. Now, first of all, this is an all-star in the limited environment already. In and of itself, it's a great card there. Does it translate to standard? Not usually, but in this deck, it can do some real work for you. You know, when it attacks, all your other guys are going to go unblocked no matter what. That's sweet, right? That's a fine. That is a fine ability. Plus, it's going to get to kill at least one of the things that blocks it. That's also nice, but in this deck, we can put a Captain's Hook on it, or a Glaive of the Guildpact on it. We can make its power bigger with Vigor Spore Worm, and then attack in with it, and suddenly, we're just wrathing the other side of the board. They have to block it with, like, all 4 of their guys, and its power is big enough to take out all of those dudes. So Ochre and Assassin is actually crazy in this deck, given the right situation. We even have another way of boosting its power, because I'm playing a couple of copies of Moodmark Painter in the deck, because Bob Ross is actually a sweet card. It's kind of another copy of Vigor Spore Worm for all intents and purposes, but those intents and purposes are evil. Super evil, because again, if we have a Bristling Boar, or any creature, really a Hungering Hydra, and we play a Moodmark Painter, well, just like when Vigor Spore Worm comes down, suddenly that creature is 5 or 6, power bigger, and can suddenly just end the game in one shot. That ability is good enough to want to play it on multiple cards, so I'm also playing the 2 copies of Moodmark. As far as the spells in the deck, I am playing a couple of copies of Necrotic Wound, keeping up with the Undergrowth theme, and it's just about the cheapest piece of removal we could play, I guess Walk the Plank or Murder are both decent choices as well, but I don't really trust having to get 2 black mana. You could also play Cast Down, but it's like $1.25. If you've got a couple of copies, you definitely do it. But all that said, Necrotic Wound is still a great piece of removal, and even if you only have 1 creature card in your graveyard, this will kill a Danto Vanguard, and it can't go indestructible to save itself, so that's sweet. 3 creatures in your graveyard, get rid of Rekindling Phoenix forever, and it's really not that hard to get a few creatures in your graveyard. By the mid-game, Necrotic Wound is a really potent piece of removal that doesn't tax your mana too much and allows you to, double spell. So Necrotic Wound is a sweet removal piece, and there are things you could replace it with if you wanted to, but in terms of both price and effectiveness, I think this hits a sweet spot. But we are playing one more card in the deck, and it's because I couldn't help myself. We're playing 1 copy of Guild Summit, which I've played exactly once, and it drew me 2 cards that game. When I played it, I tapped 2 gates. And didn't play any more gates that game, but I don't know, there's some theory crafting here. You could definitely, use this slot differently if you wanted to. But again, I can never help myself. We've got District Guide in this deck, which lets us get not only gates, but the blue source that we need to cast this in the first place. You got a couple of gates out, tap them, draw a couple of cards. You play any more gates, you're just drawing more cards. And this deck is looking for a way to refill its hand in the mid and late game, starts to execute its plan. That's around the same time it starts to run out of cards in its hand. So you need a little bit more gas, a little bit more beef. This can help you out. Now, as far as that mana base, it seems a little bit low, but we got the Mana Elves and the District Guide to help us go get mana and all that. As far as the gates go, we're running 7 in all. We got to play Golgari Guildgate. That's an obvious one. But as far as Dimir Guildgate, that's the blue mana that we'll need for Guild Summit. And obviously Gateway Plaza can make that mana as well. Or any mana that we might need, for that matter. I don't like Gateway Plaza that much. I don't want my lands to cost mana. That just seems bad on its face. But it also counts as a gate and makes whatever color we want, so it's worth having the 1 copy. Now here's our sideboard, and it's fairly cut and dry here, honestly. Pilfering Imp comes in against control decks to help get cards out of their hand and contribute to our Undergrowth count at the same time. Plus, suiting up a Pilfering Imp with an equipment is actually not a terrible game plan some of the time, so keep that in mind. But there's also Crawl Harpooner. This obviously comes in against decks that are heavy with flyers. Crawl Harpooner can be a great way to exploit our Undergrowth strategy and get those Lyra Dawnbringers out of the air. There's also Negate. I'm just playing 2 copies of this because we won't always have blue mana, but if we need to counter a counter spell in the very late game to force through an important play, we gotta have Negate for that. We've also got Knight of Malice in there. This is obviously against the white decks that we'll run up against, inevitably. It's not the absolute best game plan against aggro, but at the same time, it's still a decent game plan. We can suit this up with an equipment too and start really doing damage against certain decks with this card, or just blocking with it forever and brick walling them. If we put a Captain's Hook on this, then suddenly it can be a 5-power first striker, and that is a really powerful creature against the white decks. But there's also Vine Mare. This is conversely against the black decks, obviously. This is just unblockable in the first place, so if you start throwing equipments on it, it just closes the game out that much faster. But it also comes in against control decks, because if we can actually resolve it, they're going to have to sweep it to actually get it off the board, and it ends the game really fast. But here are your power rankings. A final score of 54, which I think may be the lowest score of the season, but at the same time, this is a kooky budget deck, you know. It's $10 all told for this thing, and you can mostly make it with draft fodder and like old rares like Captain's Hook that nobody wants. You know, it's like Captain's Hook is seriously a 10 or 15 cent rare right now. So give this thing a shot. I mean, really, what do you got to lose? On Arena, there really aren't too many rares in the deck, so it's super easy to make just off of wild cards. And it's a fun time, too, man. Again, if you can actually execute on your plan, it doesn't matter if you've taken a little bit of damage in the early game. You know, if you Bristling Boar, Captain's Hook, Swing 6, next turn, Vigor Spore for like, you know, an extra 3 or 4 damage, you have almost closed that game out in just a couple of turns. You know, this thing is really, really swingy. And again, if you can keep your creatures and equipments out and actually keep them safe, then you can close games super fast, almost out of nowhere. It's not uncommon to close games in like 2 turns once you have all the pieces in place. And you really haven't lived until you've gotten through with like a 14-power unblockable Hungering Hydra. You know, it's just a ridiculous deck, and I know that about it. You don't have to tell me. I know. This is a crazy concept, you know, but I've had a few people suggest it to me. I've done a couple of deck doctors on Patreon for this deck, and I think that there's a little bit of buzz in the sort of casual we like budget decks community, so I wanted to bring a real special spotlight to this deck so that everybody in the community actually knows that it exists, because I think that this deck had a real chance of just going under the radar, never having anybody talk about it, and I think that would be a real shame. So this deck exists, and it's really, really fun, and it's a cool concept too. You know, you got $10 to spend, try this thing out. You probably won't have to spend that much, because again, most of this is draft fodder anyway. And if you are interested in ordering the deck, just click the first link in the description down there, and that'll take you over to the deck list on tcgplayer.com. There you can check out the deck list in kind of a more compact form than a YouTube video, you know, and order any pieces that you might need at the lowest prices on the internet. $10 deck, but don't overpay for it. Check my sponsors out, view the deck list on their site, and grab any pieces you need. And speaking of TCG Player, by the way, they put Corbin Hosler and I together on a project where I did the Mono Blue Mill deck tech last week, and he played it on Arena this week. I'll link you to that content in the description box below too, and that is a wild time, man. He takes that list onto Arena, and given the fact that the format is, you know, best of 1 games, the Murmuring Mystics are in the main board. He changed a couple of things around, but for the most part, it is almost exactly the same list that you saw me profile last week. And he does some crazy stuff with it. He comes up against a Grixis, you know, dredge deck basically that's playing all 4 copies of Arclight Phoenix. Close game, ends up winning it. He also beats a Grixis deck full of like Nicol Boluses and Doom Whisperers and stuff. Like at one point between those 2 cards and, you know, Shocklands and stuff, there's like $100 sitting across the table from him, and he wins that game. There are some really crazy games in this video, so make sure you click on that content below me in the description box. One more thing about that description, by the way, if you want to help support the channel in the most direct way possible, you can just throw $1 a month into the Patreon pot. That helps more than you can possibly understand. And I'll let you vote on what decks you want to see next, and, you know, I'll let you know what videos are doing 24 hours in advance. There's a lot of reason to throw me $1 a month. It's not too much, Skrilla. I know not everybody's got it, but if you do have it, consider throwing it my way every month, just once a month, $1 every 30 days. Not too much to ask, and I'll give you something for your part of the bargain. Also, don't forget to do the other YouTube stuff. Make sure you like the video, thumbs it up, do all the stuff. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, blah, blah. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. All this means way more than I let on, by the way. Do the YouTube stuff. And I will catch you cats later. Make sure you let me know how you felt about this monstrosity down there in the comment section, or anything that we could have done differently with it, because there's, again, a lot of ways to fill out this shell. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Make sure you spread love and be kind.
This is my life, call it Chronicles, but you only see half. Monocle, I'd have to take a little break if the chronic calls, and I'm the best of both worlds, Sonic and Knuckles.